Before I get into what New Hollywood is, I would like to talk about the factors that led to New Hollywood taking shape and rising in America. From 1927 to 1948, Hollywood experienced a golden era. All this wasn't to last. Starting with United States versus Paramount Pictures, the studio system was considered to have violated antitrust laws. Paramount had to be broken up into smaller studios, and the big studio couldn't exist anymore. Without the studios to enforce Hays Code, filmmakers were free to do whatever they wanted. What was unallowed during the Hays Code, which they could now do, some of the hard don'ts included profanity, suggestive nudity, any nudity at all, the illegal traffic in drugs, white slavery, scenes of childbirth, and ridicule of the clergy, including more. There were also a list of be carefuls, which were taken on a case by case basis. Some of the be carefuls included religion and religious ceremonies, men and women in bed together, the use of drugs, and the use of firearms, and there was even more than that. While Hays Code was strict, it did not stop filmmakers from making movies depicting banned imagery. Instead, they had to be more creative and use metaphor or implication of the banned acts. Now that Hays Code is gone following the collapse of the studio system, young filmmakers could include what they wanted in the film without limits, without a code deciding what is moral and not. Without the Hays Code, it was replaced by a version of the Motion Picture Association of America, or the MPAA. These are the ratings that we know today, such as G, PG, and R. This system was a lot less restrictive, and without it, it's possible that the New Hollywood movies would have never been made because most of them followed into the R rating, which would have never been able to be made before the ending of Hays Code. The court decision Burstyn v. Wilson was also instrumental in paving the road for New Hollywood. Before this court decision, films were not protected under the First Amendment, but in 1952, this changed following the court decision. This allowed filmmakers to make what they wanted free from government oversight. As for the societal reasons that allowed New Hollywood to come to shape, was the audience shift towards television away from going to the theater to see movies. This made studios give smaller budgets to filmmakers. And another societal reason was the growing discontent with the Vietnam War, which many New Hollywood filmmakers used the themes of in their films to show their discontent with the Vietnam War. New Hollywood is made up of many characteristics. One of those characteristics is the low budget. While a low budget is often seen as a negative, these young directors used it to their advantage. These tight budgets allowed directors to maintain complete creative control over their works. Many critics and historians have different views of when the New Hollywood era is. Peter Biskind, David A. Crook, David Thomas, and Mark Harris believe that New Hollywood spans the decade from 1967 to 1977. Other critics and historians disagree. Peter Kramer and other critics, including Andrew Britton, James Monaco, Steve Neal, Thomas Schatz, and Justin Wyatt, use New Hollywood to refer to the blockbuster mode of production that emerged following Jaws and Star Wars. For the use of this essay, I will be going with the more traditional definition of New Hollywood, which refers to the stylistic and societal themes that were present in the lower budget art films of the 60s to 70s. This new type of Hollywood was on a smaller scale than the previous big Hollywood movies and epics. Production was done on a much smaller scale due to the lower budgets that these films had. Because of this, some of the films would film on location rather than on set, not just for budget reasons, but also to set the tone of the film, like seen in Easy Rider as they're riding across the American landscape. It paints the picture of America in a way that a set can't. This filmmaking also gave rise to many new techniques. An example of this is in The Godfather. The cinematographer, nicknamed the Prince of Darkness for his revolutionary lighting techniques, favored using practically motivated lighting. This means that scenes are lit by objects in the film such as windows, lamps, and overhead lighting, trying to give it a more realistic feel. He also had intentional choices to shroud characters in darkness to set the mood for the scene. The film that is commonly considered the start of New Hollywood was Bonnie and Clyde. It captured the essence of the Great Depression. It portrays Bonnie and Clyde as a sympathetic young couple who are struggling like the rest of Americans. Law enforcement is portrayed as a vengeance-seeking law enforcement officer, Frank Hammer, who's motivated to catch Bonnie and Clyde after being humiliated by them. The director of the film, Penn, later said, for the final scene, it was an in-your-face film, in the sense of saying, look, if we're in Vietnam War, it's not going to be an immaculate and sanitized bang bang. It's going to be fucking bloody. This over-the-top violence was a departure from traditional Hollywood that had to stick to Hays Code. Another departure from traditional Hollywood that was present in New Hollywood was the departure from the traditional three-act structure of traditional filmmaking. An example of this is Deer Hunter. Deer Hunter was critically acclaimed, but it was noted that the length and pace of scenes was something that new people were unaccustomed to. The film starts with our main character working in a steel mill. The characters' identities are hidden by the suits they wear. This commentary on the rapidly industrializing United States turning men into cogs in the factory parallels how once they arrive in Vietnam, the character's identity is hidden by the harsh conditions of the jungle, and how they have to suppress who they are in order to survive. Many other New Hollywood films echo these sentiments of reduced individuality to fit into a more conforming universal society. New Hollywood also gave rise to cinema of attraction, which is defined as filmmakers focused on visual thrills and engaging the audience's senses over plot. This is seen very well in Easy Rider, which captured the rising motorcycle culture in America. With the wide landscape shots of them riding their motorcycles across America, it was more about giving the audience just something cool to look at rather than it being focused on the plot. Apocalypse Now, coming in at the end of the New Hollywood era in 1979, was an interesting Vietnam film. Kubrick didn't want it to be seen as an anti-war film, because in his eyes, a film that glorifies war cannot be an anti-war film. This shows the complicated connection that filmmakers and the American people had with the Vietnam War at the time. I think that the main connection between all of these films is the feeling of freedom that runs throughout them. Coming from young directors with no limits as to what they can do, the freedom of these films runs deeper than what is projected on the screen. New Hollywood could have only happened with the right set of factors outlined, and it resulted in an explosion of new art at a scale that hasn't existed since. As the blockbuster came to rise, freedom was cycled for what some might say is an even more American value, consumerism. As mainstream filmmaking went from an art to trying to fit as many family-friendly, merchandisable characters, it feels like the American soul of film has been lost, but the money speaks for itself. George Lucas, who came up in New Hollywood and used its element to craft Star Wars, ultimately led to New Hollywood's downfall. As studios saw how much money there was to make from merchandise, rather than a ticket sale, the focus of filmmaking began to shift.